So, when we talk about the fight for LGBTQ rights in America, you've got to understand this wasn't just a single battle. It was a war fought over centuries, in courtrooms, on the streets, and in quiet moments of defiance. Today, we're going to trace the key turning points of that fight, from laws that literally made existence a crime to victories that changed the entire nation. Let's dive in.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll start with the legal bedrock of persecution, the actual laws on the books. Then we'll see the first real sparks of organized resistance. After that, we'll get to the explosion that was the Stonewall Uprising, and then track how the fight moved into the courts. And finally, we'll land where we are today, with the major victories and the brand new challenges.
For most of American history, the fight for LGBTQ rights, well, it wasn't really a fight for rights at all. It was just a struggle to survive against laws that were designed to criminalize who you were. For centuries, the law wasn't a shield, it was a weapon. Okay, take a look at this timeline. What's absolutely wild here is just how long this goes on. This story starts way before the United States was even a thing. Back in 1533, England passes the Buggery Act. It made sodomy a crime punishable by death. And those laws, they were imported directly into the American colonies. For more than 300 years, they just stayed on the books. It took until 1961 for a single state, Illinois, to finally say, okay, enough, and get rid of this centuries-old legal weapon.
So you hear this term sodomy laws, but what were they really? Well, that's the thing. They were super vague, and that was the whole point. They could cover almost any sexual act that was considered unnatural. And that vagueness gave police the power to harass you, employers the power to fire you, and landlords the power to evict you, all based on suspicion. It created this constant climate of fear. But even with all this legal pressure, something was happening under the surface. People weren't just taking it. Long before it was part of any national conversation, communities were forming, and folks were starting to fight back. These are the first sparks of defiance, the ones we often forget.
And this right here, this is so important to get. A lot of people think the whole LGBTQ rights movement just kind of popped up out of nowhere in 1969, but that is just not the case. The groundwork was being laid for generations by some incredibly brave people who just refused to be invisible. And this just shows you how far back these roots go. Look at this. We're in the 1880s, and you have William Dorsey Swann, a former slave, who's not only calling himself a drag queen, the first person we know of to do so, but he's organizing drag balls and defending his community. By 1924, you've got America's first documented gay rights group. And then in the 50s, the homophile movement tried a different tactic. They pushed for quiet assimilation, arguing that gay people were just like everyone else and deserved to be accepted.
But you know how it goes. The more visible a community becomes, the bigger the backlash. And during the Cold War, this persecution became official government policy. It was called the Lavender Scare. And as Senator Alan K. Simpson points out here, it was happening right alongside the anti-communist Red Scare, and it probably hurt even more people. The twisted logic was that gay people were a national security risk because they could be blackmailed, and that led to a massive purge from all kinds of government jobs. All that pressure, eventually something had to give, and it did, but maybe not where you'd expect. 3 whole years before the famous Stonewall riots, you had the Compton's cafeteria riot in San Francisco. The police were constantly harassing the transgender women and drag queens who hung out there, and one night, they just fought back. This was one of the very first LGBTQ uprisings in American history, and a huge moment for trans activism. And that brings us to the event, the one that changed everything. Now, it wasn't the first act of defiance, not by a long shot, but the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, man, that was the spark that lit the fire for the modern gay rights movement. So, you gotta picture the Stonewall Inn. It wasn't some glamorous club. It was a dive, a mafia-run dive bar in Greenwich Village. But for the people who went there, the drag queens, the trans folks, the homeless kids, the people who were rejected everywhere else, it was a sanctuary. Police raids on gay bars were just a fact of life. But on June 28, 1969, when the cops showed up, the patrons decided they were done taking it. And the effect? It was like a dam breaking. This wasn't just a riot that ended. No, it sparked a whole new kind of activism. The goal wasn't to quietly fit in anymore. It was about gay liberation, loud and proud. Brand new, more confrontational groups like the Gay Liberation Front popped up. The very first Pride marches were organized a year later to mark the anniversary. A single moment of rebellion had just kicked off a nationwide movement. So after Stonewall, the energy was incredible. But the fight had to change. It moved off the streets and into the system, into city halls, state houses, and the courts. This next chapter was all about a new kind of struggle, the fight for political power and actual legal recognition.
And this is where things get really complicated. The 70s and 80s were this period of total contradiction. On one side, you're seeing these amazing breakthroughs, like Harvey Milk getting elected in San Francisco, but at the exact same time, that visibility created this massive, organized political opposition. It became a whole new front in the culture wars. And the one issue where this whole conflict really came to a head was marriage. In 1996, Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. What did it do? Basically, it told the federal government, you are not allowed to recognize same-sex couples, period. This denied people over 1,000 federal rights, things like filing joint taxes or getting Social Security benefits. The argument against it was, at its core, pretty simple. Marriage is a fundamental right, and you can't just deny that right to an entire group of people without a really, really good reason, a reason that opponents argued just didn't exist.
And that legal argument, that idea of a fundamental right, that would become the key that unlocked a whole wave of victories in the 21st century. But it also set the stage for the new fights we're seeing today.
I mean, the speed of change in the early 2000s was just staggering. Seriously. First, in 2003, the Supreme Court finally gets rid of all those old sodomy laws in Lawrence v. Texas. Then 2010, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone, and gay Americans can finally serve openly in the military. And then the big one, 2015, Obergefell v. Hodges. In a single day, marriage equality became the law of the entire land. And what's really fascinating is watching how the arguments against equality had to shift. People were already pointing this out back in '96 when DOMA was passed. This legal journal called it a retreat into moral authoritarianism. The fight was no longer about specific acts. It was about the fundamental principles of equality itself. So once marriage equality was won, you might think, okay, it's over. But no, the fight just moved. It shifted to new battlegrounds. And today, that's what we're seeing. Hundreds of state laws aimed at trans people, especially kids. Laws restricting what can be taught in schools, widespread book bans, and even a 2023 Supreme Court decision that lets some businesses refuse service to gay couples. I think we all remembered this image, right? The White House lit up in rainbow colors in 2015. It really felt like the finish line, this huge, historic victory lap for a struggle that had gone on for decades. And it absolutely was a victory. But it wasn't the end of the story. So when you look back at the whole journey, from secret societies to massive nationwide parades, from being called criminals to being celebrated at the White House, it's been an incredible, tough road. And it leaves us right here with this one big question. As the battle lines keep shifting, what's the next turning point in this unfinished story going to be?